The Reagan movie disqualified from winning an Academy Award. We'll tell you why. It's pretty interesting, but I'm here with Paul Kengor. My name is Grace Reilly, and we're so glad that you joined us for this episode of the Weekend Spectator. It's great to be with you, Paul.
The great and gracious Grace, it is good to be with you again.
So amazing to be with you always. And you just wrote a really, really great article for the American Spectator that fully covers this story. But we wanted to go into it more and break it down a bit because of how crazy it is. So, for anyone who doesn't know, and those of you who listen to the show a lot would, but Paul Kengor's book, The Crusader, which you can see behind me here, is what the movie Reagan was based off of. And we've talked about the movie quite a bit. Hopefully, all of you have seen it by now. If not, definitely check it out because it was really good, amazing, and worthy of an award. And that's exactly why we're going to break down what Hollywood is saying about it and why Hollywood has deemed it unworthy.
Yeah, it's crazy. So, I mean, we basically to sum it up, all right. So we have been disqualified from any Academy Award, even nominations for the movie, because we didn't meet the DEI standards of the Academy, right? So the Motion Picture Academy, and it's ironic because when this movie was first released in August 2024, I mean, I've done so many interviews, so many different screenings. And we've had, a lot of positive response from people who love the individual performances of the actors, right? Actors, actresses.
Yeah, the
And
audience rating, by the way, we covered this before too. The audience rating of the film was excellent in the 90s
yeah,
compared to the
98%.
critic rating, which was the opposite. So it was very clear the bias there because the audience did really enjoy the film.
Yeah, in fact, it's an all-time record for the largest gap between, I think it's what Rotten Tomatoes or whatever the site is. It's like something like 98% approval rating from people who actually saw the movie and like 18-20% from the critics. And if you look at the critics, I mean, it's totally ideologically motivated. And I wrote a piece at the time about this called something like Responding to the Reagan Movie Critics. But however, that said, I've seen hardly anybody, including among the left-wing critics, who criticized any of the actors' individual performances. Right? Everybody thought that Dennis Quaid, for example, was just fabulous. I mean, it's really hard to. We all feared all along, who are you going to get to play Reagan? Because it's going to be everyone's going to focus on that. You don't want it to seem corny. You don't want it to seem like a kind of a parody or a caricature, but he just pulls it off, right?
It was the perfect choice, and I do have to say, based on an episode ago or something, you did a little Reagan voice, so they maybe should have considered you because it was pretty spot on, just acting out how he would talk for the quotes.
I could not have done what Quaid did. I mean, Quaid
So
had the voice down, the look, the angle of the face,
it was
everything.
fascinating, actually, the mannerisms. He
Yeah.
did an excellent job playing Reagan, and even, I mean, looking and for obviously everyone who was alive and lived through Reagan's presidency, they would pick up on that quickly. But for everyone else, so the people in my generation, I mean, if you look at just the videos of Reagan next to those of Dennis Quaid, it's a pretty amazing similarity. He does such a good job playing him.
Yeah, I was astonished. In fact, Andrew Coffin, a Grove City College alum like you, when he now runs the Reagan Ranch Center, and he sent me a picture when Dennis Quaid first went to the Reagan Ranch and he was trying out for the part. And I shouldn't even say trying out for the part. The part was almost his from the outset if he wanted it, right? But they sent me pictures of Dennis with Reagan's hat, with the denim kind of thing on, kind of in a sort of angle. What do you think? And I thought, wow. This guy might actually be able to pull it off, right? What's he going to sound like? Well, he sounded great. So we got kudos for him for the performance of the young David Henry, who played the young Reagan, John Voight, Victor the KGB agent, all these different people. But the one person, all right, and this gets, I think, this whole Academy Award nomination, who really struck everybody was Penelope Ann Miller as Nancy Reagan. She was fantastic. And we all thought, well, who's going to play Nancy, right? I mean, that's a hard thing to do too. But when I saw the movie, everybody else saw the movie, and I would do these screenings afterwards, and I'd say to the audience, hey, what did you think? And someone would always say, yeah, the gal who played Nancy, man, she just hit it out of the park. Where did you get her? She was fantastic. And I would joke, Grace, I would say, yeah, she was great. I think she supports an Academy. She deserves an Academy Award nomination as Best Supporting Actress. And then my scripted line became, now, of course, if she was playing Michelle Obama, she probably would win the Academy Award, right? That thing would be gift wrapped on her front porch. But she didn't play Michelle Obama. We know she's, and everyone would laugh because we all knew it was true. So that said, I didn't realize how true that was until the last couple of weeks, and I find out that we are being disqualified because we don't meet the DEI standards. So had she played Michelle Obama and been a black first lady rather than a white first lady, well, right there,
Well,
she would have qualified,
and
right?
my other question, and we kind of talked about this in the last episode a little bit. So, should Reagan have been cast as a by a black, like, should it have been a black man playing Reagan
Right,
to
right.
then
Or at the
qualify?
least, yeah, at the very least, they would have had to have surrounded Reagan by certain, DEI criteria categories. And this is what's a little confusing. I write about in the piece. So we have black characters in the film. I mean, not a lot because Reagan didn't have a black Secretary of Defense or anything like that, or any of the major people around him. The Pope wasn't black, Margaret Thatcher wasn't, Mikhail Gorbachev wasn't. I mean, what do you do, right?
That's the point. It's like you can't, if it's a historical film based on history, you don't cast people differently. It just doesn't make sense to, and that's the same thing that we can go into for other movies. Disney has had examples of this, but things should have nothing to do with that.
Right, especially for historical accuracy, and they wanted historical accuracy. Now, there are two scenes in the movie. One where Reagan is young man, Eureka College, and he has two black teammates. They are William Franklin, Bergie Berghardt, and Jim Ratton. These are the two. And in fact, Reagan called him his closest friend, Grace, until he died in August 1981. President Reagan called Bergie the morning before he went into surgery, right? And Bergie died because of that surgery. But Reagan, they were denied a hotel room. And so Reagan here, young Reagan played by David Henry. So he brings them home to his parents' house, and Jack and Nell Reagan say, "Come on in, boys." It's a wonderful story. Reagan told that story hundreds of times. It was absolutely formational in his life. So we put it in the movie. Now we never said, Grace, we need some blacks in this movie, right? Let's where can we get we didn't do that, right? We did what came naturally. We put in these characters because they were part of Reagan's life. There's even a scene with B.E. Kirchman, who's this Russian Jewish dissident. He's in Reagan's Dixon, Illinois church, First Christian Church, South Hennepin Avenue in Dixon, Illinois. The preacher who's played by Ben Cleaver, who's played by, oh, come on, you know his name,
The previous
Kevin
movie, yeah, Kevin Sorbo.
Kevin Sorbo. So Kevin Sorbo plays the preacher, and B.E. Kirchman, who's this Russian dissident, played by Elia Baskin, is that his last name?
Not sure.
Latvian actor. He's the one in Spider-Man who's like, rent, rent, where's the rent? Right? So he plays B.E. Kirchman. And I even said to him on the set in Guthrie, I said, "Hey, Kirchman, I found you. I discovered you. You wouldn't be here if it wasn't for me." Because I discovered this guy in the archives of the First Christian Church in like the summer of 2001 when I went there. So warm, good story. We put it in there. And again, not because we were trying to click off, an ethnic or religious diversity box or something like that. And also, the film is just filled with strong women. Yeah, Penelope Ann Miller, Jennifer O'Neill, the wonderful Jennifer O'Neill, who played the lovely actress in summer of 1942, over 50 years ago. She plays the older Nell Reagan. The younger Nell Reagan is played by Amanda Rigetti. Jane Wyman is played by, is it Mina? So I can't remember. She's,
Meet most of these actors, correct? I know
yeah.
you got some special experience with Dennis Quaid and you got to know him a bit. And we've talked before too about how instrumental his faith was at this time and how kind of he started sharing a lot more about his faith, especially as this movie came out. But that's also a really cool layer to this, how you've been able to get to know the actors in the film and David Henry, of course, we've talked about before. That just gives kind of another layer of insight into it. And I think too, just hitting on what you're mentioning with what the movie did and what the movie did well, the problem with all the DEI stuff is that it assumes that if a movie is not only looking through the lens of race when they're just making decisions and casting people, that they have malintent in doing so. And of course, as you're explaining, that's not the case. And that's the whole problem with it. And it's the same thing with DEI and every other sphere of life where it's being used to basically just only look at one thing instead of looking at merit or what would make sense for historical accuracy. So that's the whole problem. It's assuming and punishing this film for doing nothing wrong at all by assuming that they had malintent and not uh casting just for DEI. Which, by the way, I mean, with that being a consideration, that's not going to help the films be better, perform better. It should be
No.
merit-based and what makes sense for castings and what makes sense for characters. That should be important.
Yeah, and also too, I think it gets down to what kind of DEI. Like
Mhm.
for example, so I just gave examples of black characters in the film, plenty of women, also women that I don't mention in the article. I didn't mention Muggs Cleaver, who was Ronald Reagan's girlfriend. And in fact, when I met Elia on the set, it was outside the Reagan bus, and we were in Guthrie, Oklahoma, and I said, "Hey, I found you, B. Kirchman." I talked for quite a while about with the girl who played Muggs Cleaver. And I felt really bad when the movie came out, Grace, because she didn't get any speaking roles that were kept in the film. This is what happens. Stuff ends up on the cutting room floor. But and there we're not saying like, hey, let's put as many women in the film as we can, right? We didn't do that. So you have conservatives making this film who are just telling the story naturally, authentically, but the DEI boxes that we failed to check, it must have had to do with sexual stuff, right? LGBTQ, LGBTQIA plus, right? Transgender, gay characters, all of that stuff. What do you want us to do? You want
Well,
us to have George Shultz, pretend that he's gender dysphoric and, moan to Mikhail Gorbachev that he's confused about his sexuality. You want Dick Darman and James Baker to be reinvented as gay lovers, right? What do you want us to do there? Has nothing to do with the film.
Well, and I think that the other thing that this highlights, so one of the reasons that people loved Reagan so much is because they had missed that. They had missed having kind of a just family-friendly film that didn't get into all of that sexuality stuff
Right.
because that's shoved down Americans' throats nowadays.
Mhm.
You're hard-pressed to find a film that isn't either overly sexual or including all sorts of political left-wing radical underlying messages, whether that just be the messages themselves or the obvious push of LGBTQ plus roles and whatnot and stuff like that. So that's also kind of the point here that it's very interesting that this clearly is coming from the top down as well, because if any film wants an award, obviously that's important. And obviously, too, this is on different layers, the DEI qualifications with behind the scenes stuff, the movie, it's all complicated. But it does definitely point to that, and it also explains a lot more why pretty much every mainstream film now is involving stuff like this. And
Right.
normalizing it to the point too, where something that I always noticed was every show that you find now pretty much, and this is a generalization, but most shows that are targeted towards young people, high schoolers, middle schoolers, whatever it may be, include characters that are part of the LGBT community. And what that's doing is completely normalizing and making it seem like it's a lot more common than it actually is in real life, too, which is also interesting.
By the way, we have a like in the film, we have a montage. It's when Reagan's up for re-election of every left-wing criticism of Reagan, just going out blaming him
That,
for AIDS,
that
yeah,
was
all that other
perfect.
stuff. Yeah, we put all of that in there in order to show people we're trying to represent the other side, right? The other point of view. That wasn't good enough. I was thinking, I won't say what this is. I almost wrote about it a few years ago, but I knew I couldn't prove it. And there was a movie I was watching about World War II, and the guys are liberated from where they're being held as POWs, and two of the guys coming out kind of decrepit, sort of, and they're arm in arm, almost holding hands. And I said to one of my kids, I said, "Are those two supposed to be like two gay characters or something? Are they supposed to be like with each other?" And my one kid was like, "Oh, dad," right? And the other one's like, "No, I think you're onto something there." And you wonder, like for example, just from a historical accuracy point of view, if you had two gay guys who were POWs in a camp in World War II, and people watching probably were guys in those camps who were of that orientation, they're not going to be holding hands and walking around, but not in that era, not in that era, right? But Hollywood today wants to like go back and reinvent the past to make it seem like, yeah, there'd be two guys walking around the POW camp, holding hands, proclaiming that they were married or something. No, that didn't. No, that's historically inaccurate. And by the way, if you're a lefty, why would you want to say that? Because your whole narrative is that gay people had been persecuted throughout history up until like the glorious 2000s, right? So, pick and choose what you want to use and what you don't want to, which acts you want to grind and what you don't want to grind. But you can't make up and insert these characters. We got to make Margaret Thatcher a Latina, a Latin X. I mean, you can't do that, right? It's just so to have a movie disqualified for that is outrageous. Now, in the article, I give examples. This would be a fun exercise for you and I to walk through, or any of our listeners, readers, watchers to go through. Go back and look at the list. These DEI requirements for the Academy Awards for the Oscars. This just started in 2023. All right. Richard Dreyfuss, an old liberal from Hollywood, he said these standards make me want to vomit. But go through and look at previous films and wonder how many of these Academy Award winners for Best Picture would be disqualified over this? Probably all of them.
Yeah.
Probably pretty
Well,
much.
exactly. And so you can see this up on your screen now, some of the names, and we'll go through a few in more detail. But we want to mention that you can actually find this list through the article. It's linked right in there, very clearly, so you can look through this more yourself. But a few we wanted to talk about: The Godfather, Sound of Music, uh,
Right.
all things that, yes, if a little exercise, if you go back through, how many would be disqualified? And I think it's important to ask the question too, are these not some of the greatest films? Right?
Yeah, yeah.
Reserve.
I use Schindler's List, 1993. Okay, think, folks. All right, wokester, Hollywood wokester. All right, what are you going to do with that film? All right, especially if it's historically accurate. All right, do you want black Nazi prison guards? Right. Well, I bet you love that, huh? Right. Do you want transgender Nazi prison guards? Do you want Latino Jewish residents of Krakow, Poland, in your there weren't any Latinos in Krakow? The people in the concentration camps were Jews. The Central European white ethnic Jews. I mean, if you want to call them white, I hate the whole ethnicity thing, right? But what would you have done to Schindler's List to make that meet the DEI requirements? Steven Spielberg, you watching this? I mean, jump in here and fix this. You're somebody with some clout in Hollywood.
Yeah.
Uh, it was Martin Scorsese, Francis Ford Coppola, people involved, film directors involved in movies like The Godfather. What would you have done to The Godfather? What do you make Michael Corleone, yeah, bisexual or something? Patton, General George S. Patton. What are you going to do to Patton? Right?
Yeah.
Okay, troops, those of you who are gay, come with me, boys. This is nuts. It's
Yeah, no, it
completely.
is. I would love to know too. So we talked a bit last time about communism in Hollywood, and that's something that you've done pretty extensive research on, and you've written whole chapters in your books on Marxism on this topic. And even in the classes that you teach, you go through some of the main players throughout the years in that. And I just wonder if you have any thoughts, having that background knowledge, looking at the way that the left has kind of eaten the left in this scenario, where now it's the industry has completely shifted in a way that is just different than you could say the glory days of Hollywood, whatever it may be. It's very interesting stuff, I think, to just look at as a whole. And also, I'll add, and this is going to be off topic a little for the next part of this, but it's interesting to see the parallels that are coming from the current political situation with Trump and what he's done to dismantle DEI next to
Yeah.
all of this.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. In fact, you got to wonder if, Look, everybody's sick of DEI, and a lot of liberals are too. Like I said, I closed the article by quoting Richard Dreyfuss. So a lot of them clearly hate this. Somebody like Steven Spielberg has to hate this. And all the different Hollywood. I also give examples of more recent Academy Award winners, movies like The King's Speech. Those are all British guys. It's the British King of England. What are you going to do there to make that movie meet your DEI requirements? The Artist, which is a great modern silent film, which won the Academy Award the day before, the year before, or the year after The King's Speech. Penelope Ann Miller is in that. What do you do to that? What do you do to that? How do you change that? And I haven't mentioned, have I, that not only was the Reagan movie disqualified this year from being even nominated because of DEI requirements, over 100 other films were. So eventually, liberals, they're coming for you here too. They're gonna eat their own. And unless you want to play their game, and this is what they're doing, they're trying to force people, which shows you that DEI is all about coercion. So it's almost like a form of ideological blackmail, right? If you want to play this game and you want to be nominated for an award, you show us, you stick these figures or characters or whatever in your movies. And liberals being liberals who are supposed to be about artistic freedom, man, you guys should hate that. I mean, that's the kind of thing that you accuse your conservative fascist opponents of doing, right? I mean, this is like a form of fascism, right? Trying to tell them what they have to do with their art. It's like a form of it's controlling their art. Liberals are all about artistic expression. This puts limits on what you can do with your own films. Liberals, you ought to hate this. Speak up. Damn it, speak up for a change.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's the whole point is that it shouldn't be about DEI. That's the whole point of what we're saying. That should not be the lens by which these things are evaluated. It should have nothing to do with that. It should have to do with the merit of the film. So
Yeah.
it's hard to watch, but of course that industry, yeah, it's messing itself up. And I guess just to before we close,
By the
uh
way, can I say one thing on
yeah,
that? And this is ironically a time when more blacks, of course, are in movies than ever before. And I don't think you even need to force any of this anymore, right? I mean, you
no.
might look at a movie like with all white people in it as a liberal and complain there's not black people in it. But if the historical figures weren't black, that's just the way there is. That is, you wouldn't make a movie about black slavery and have white slaves, right? About American Indians and have white people be Cherokees, right? I mean, that's just simply not the way it works. And also, I should write on this. Ronald Reagan, when he was head of the Screen Actors Guild, led the fight in the late 1940s to include more black people in historically black roles. And Reagan, this is going to be in my next book on Reagan and race. Reagan really went after blackface in films because he said, I don't want white people playing those black roles. Those are black roles that black actors
Well,
should
and of
have.
course that's the whole point, right? Like it's a good thing to that it should be complete equal opportunity in this industry.
Mhm.
And it's a
Right.
great thing that those moves were made at a certain point. But what this is, and is taking it too far, it's the same thing with the two genders turned into hundreds of genders.
Yeah.
It just took it too far.
Hmm.
And of course, lost the public's endorsement in many ways. I guess there are plenty of people who still would align with that ideology. But
To
the
the
point,
point that this
like,
DEI, these criteria boxes, part of it is gender, but it's really not because it doesn't actually mean women in the film because we have women in our film. It means transgender. That's what they want there.
yep,
So it's not really race, gender, sexual orientation. It's like race, transgender, and sexual orientation. That's the new holy trinity of today's cultural revolutionaries in Hollywood. And
yeah.
it just shows how the left too, Grace, they just poison everything.
Oh,
They just
absolutely.
poison everything. The Academy's job is to preserve the integrity of film and celebrate artistic achievement in film. And what are they doing? They're ideologizing it, right? It's really sick. Like Richard Dreyfuss says, it makes you want to vomit.
Yeah, well, and the good news with all of this is that there are still films being made that are family friendly, good, and purposefully without those sorts of agendas. Because I mean, if you're a parent and you have kids, that's when a lot of this comes into play, I think. But Reagan's a good example. All of the different actors in the film have a lot of amazing work that they've all worked on. Dennis Quaid has obviously done a lot of great projects that are family friendly and good valued. Kevin Sorbo and his family, they do faith-based films, incredible work, a lot of family-friendly films with amazing messages. And other actors as well. Of course, you've got John Voight, same thing. So really, that's a good takeaway that there's a lot of
And
good
it
films still getting.
it shows that we have to be willing to make these films, and we could care less about whether or not we receive the approval and support of Hollywood and the Academy. You just have to go on in the world without them. They won't let you make movies under their companies. Fine, we'll go make them independently, right? They won't give us awards. Fine, we don't want the awards, right? You guys just control your little clique like you've taken over your clique of academia, right? Fine, we'll go to the other colleges, right?
Mhm.
So that's how you have to react to it. Do your
Yeah,
own thing.
and it'll certainly keep going that way. And it is amazing that films like this are being made. And the Reagan film, especially, if you haven't seen it, you should definitely check out. And if you haven't read this book back here, The Crusader, you should, of course, check that out by the one and only Paul Kengor. We got him here, so you've gotten your exclusive on the whole film. Be excited about that. But everyone, make sure that you also go and read Paul's article on the website. It'll be linked and it goes fully in depth into this and it has really great analysis beyond what we've talked about on this episode. But as always, go to spectator.org for all of our latest stories and articles and make sure that you like and subscribe to this podcast to stay up to date with the latest. We're so happy that you joined us and make sure to share it with your friends. We will actually not see you next week. Next week we'll be off, but we will see you the following week. So until then, goodbye and see you soon.
I will be speaking at Eureka College.
Very fun.
Yeah, that's why we can't do this next week. But grazie, Grace, and we will see you in a couple weeks.
See you in a couple weeks.